You're watching Newsfeed AM. Let's get into this conversation now. Public sector unions are hoping for the best when the Finance Minister, Enoch, Godongwana, delivers the budget speech later today. Wage hikes, these are the talks between unions and government. Those have deadlocked. And now some are planning to strike, while others say they'll continue with negotiations. Saftu General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi joining me now for that conversation. Mr. Vavi, good morning to you and thanks for your time. Let's start with the deadlock. Has there been any movement? Because all of these things usually are resolved around the table.
Well, there has been no movement whatsoever, really. The government instead unilaterally implemented its 3% wage offer in November to all public sector workers. And the last time I had a conversation with the soldiers union, they had not yet implemented that at the beginning of February. But everywhere else, that have been implemented. We have two problems with that. We have a problem in that when the employer just implement the wage offer without an agreement, that immediately undermines the collective bargaining system in the country and sends a signal to the private sector that, well, you can follow our lead. If they don't agree, just implement what you offer to them and let them go jump in the nearest hole available. That's the first problem we have. And secondly, we have a problem in that government already undermined collective bargaining when it signed an agreement with public sector workers, this is the majority of them in 2018, and on its last leg simply refused to implement the terms of that agreement and blamed the coronavirus for that. Now there's already a precedent, unfortunately, in the public sector that today will just be another final nail in the collective bargaining system in the state, in that the government will today announce the wage offer to the public sector workers, and that all the negotiators of government that will have to do is to find a way around that. There can be no worse employer in terms of undermining its own employees and the systems, orderly systems of collective bargaining, that the government does just do all of that. And that's why today we are picketing in Pretoria at 10 o'clock. We are marching in Cape Town from 12 o'clock.
Mr. Vavi, there are those who will say, and in a way almost be sympathetic to government, and suggest to you that the data that was put out yesterday by the South African Reserve Bank. Now, just to set the context, this is data which provides a projection of South Africa's economic growth cycle for the next 6 to 12 months. That data, it simply says that there is a signal, in fact, there are heightened signals of a technical recession that we are heading towards. And so they're going to ask, where do you think the money is going to come from?
Well, what they will not say is that this is the 2011 recession in South Africa since the ANC took over government in 20 years ago. Our economy, and we've been warning them, is literally trapped in an unsustainable growth path that is based on what was designed by the colonial powers when they occupied our country over 400 years ago. And this basically makes South Africa to be a post where they are involved in what economists call extraction activity, meaning that they take our minerals out of South Africa raw, send it overseas for them to be beneficiated, for them to create jobs, and for them to create secondary industries in Europe and increasingly in China and India, whilst leaving South Africa only relating with those minerals, with working under dangerous working conditions in the mines and for low pay. We've been arguing that they must change the economic structure, the growth path of South Africa from time immemorial. This government is simply refusing to do so. It will not listen to workers. It will not listen to progressive voices in the economy, but it has enslaved itself only to the IMF, World Bank, and the rating agencies who are telling them to ride on, brother. And that riding on, carry on with what they call structural reforms and or fiscal consolidation means neoliberalism, means austerity programs. In practical reality, for the 80% of the citizens of South Africa who rely on government services such as post offices, security, health, education, and policing, it means that those services will continue to deteriorate because the government is now being forced to cut its budget. We're making an example in our statement that government is going to cut more than 2 billion rands on health budget alone, meaning that it will not be able to fill vacancies, it will not be able to invest in the infrastructure in all of the public hospitals, and it will not be able to do the same in the police stations, in the education institutions, and everywhere. And that's why we have been protesting and making a call to the government to say, abandon austerity programs, abandon neoliberalism, and do the hard work, get those minerals in the hands of South Africans, get the land in the hands of South Africans, use the land for food security, for employment creation, use those minerals to create jobs here, to re-industrialize South Africa again and build this manufacturing sector. The government is refusing to do all of that in favor of this neoliberalism and austerity programs.
Mr. Vavi, someone listening to you right now, they may get confused. What is neoliberalism? What is austerity? If we can just move away for 1 minute, away from that kind of language and talk about the immediate issues that affect South Africa right now and that have a direct impact not only on the workers you represent, but the population as a whole. As we speak right now, a report in the Business Day has come out today suggesting that the financial sector is busy conducting what they call simulation exercises should it come to it that the Eskom grid collapses. That's the immediate issue for South Africans that affects not just you, but me and the rest of the country. So, here's the question. Have you had conversations with the people that are represented by your biggest affiliate, NUMSA, that work at Eskom, to say, gentlemen, you were once accused. In fact, there has been an accusation of sabotage. Have any of you been engaged in such? And if so, please stop it, because the country is collapsing.
Well, let me just 1 minute before I deal with the issue of the crisis at hand today. Neoliberalism is an ideology, a belief on the part of particular political players in the economy who simply believe that the role of the state in the economy must be reduced into being a referee. A referee means that its responsibility must only be limited to creating a conducive environment for the private sector to prosper, meaning that they will believe that once the private sector prosper and generate enough profits, the poor, the workers will at some point benefit from that through jobs and other basic services that will be accruing from those activities. That has not worked, Xoli, for 28 years. It has not worked anywhere else in the world. We need active developmental governments that can drive economic growth, that can intervene, that can discipline capital, that can dangle carrots on them to provide the services and to create the jobs, something that we do not have in South Africa today. That's what neoliberalism. Austerity is budget cuts. what we have been experiencing since 2008 in response to the world economic crisis that visited the whole world. That's budget cuts. So it's a decorated word. Now, coming to this point, we expect the government today to realize that the solutions that are purely based on the private sector, such as the introduction of the independent power producers that are mostly multinational corporations that have been guaranteed profits in South Africa, even at the expense of milking dry Eskom, will eventually be put to an end. And that government will use Eskom, will finance Eskom, will call role players such as us and NUMSA into the round table to look at the crisis of the fact that Eskom is in debt of 400 to 450 billion, to ask a question, how do we get around that particular crisis? And from our side, we have loads of suggestions to put on the table to address the particular crisis. And the first, we will argue, is that the Eskom debt must be declared odious, meaning that it's an unnecessary debt that was generated to corruptly, to fund Dupi Kusile with billions and billions of rands that should have been used to re-engineer an Eskom that will lead introduction of renewables in the economy, and in order to play a role of ensuring that we move our economy from a carbon-dominated economy towards renewables.
Mr. Vavi.
And that the government simply allowed the deepening of the debt when it was actually directly conflicted by Hitachi and the shares to the other companies related to that is the biggest scandals that many people are not willing to talk about in this country. And yet we are being told all the time that we must pay without looking at that particular factor.
Well, I agree with you. And indeed, the points you're making, absolutely valid. But there is something that can be done in the immediate. And if those, in power, not just looking at the Eskom performance, but decision makers is what I'm trying to get at. Decision makers have us believe that if the plant performance at Eskom can be sorted out in a short time, that could alleviate the pressure of load shedding that we are experiencing right now. Stage 6 is what we are on. I'm asking you the question as a federation that has in its fold NUMSA, which organizes at Eskom. And the simple question is, if politicians and those that run Eskom are saying, if we can improve the plant performance, that could alleviate load shedding in the immediate. Have you had a conversation with workers that belong to NUMSA to say, have any of you been engaged in sabotage? If so, please can you stop? Because this is affecting the entire country.
We are told that there are about 27 people or more who have been arrested for sabotage in various Eskom plants and power stations. We celebrate that. We can never tolerate, even if it was to be our member, any person who will put our country at risk or people who are in hospitals at risk because we have some nefarious agendas of sabotaging Eskom. We cannot ever be associated with that. That's the first point. But the second point is that we must be careful that we do not chase the shadows and create an impression that all the crisis that is at Eskom is because of the 27 people that have been arrested for sabotage. That's just not true. Eskom is facing what we are told by our own technical experts. It's facing an engineering problem. It doesn't have engineers that can ensure that the surplus electricity power that it has can be put into the grid today. It's an engineering problem of ensuring that the power stations that they are rushing to close are properly maintained to sustain their life. That's a second problem. solve those two problems. And we are told that the engineers, by the way, as Eskom, told the lawyer who's been put in charge of the operation that this is where the solution is. But they are being told that no, we're not going to do that. All we need is to strengthen the position of the independent power producers and to make money at the expense of Eskom, and that you must just buy more diesel from the diesel mafia. Something fundamentally is going wrong at Eskom, and we had hoped that the new board will come in and address those two problems in Eskom. But we have no hope now that allegations are flowing around that the chairperson of the current board at Eskom is himself an investor in the independent power producers, and therefore is conflicted and will never ever drive an Eskom that is based on the will of the people, that is on the hands of the workers and the people of this country, that can lead this Eskom into developing renewables in the economy, and that will strengthen this position, and that it once had, that it once enjoyed as the provider of the cheapest electricity, the most efficient way in the history of this country.
Yeah. Mr. Vavi, let me thank you very much for your time. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this discussion. Thank you very much indeed for chatting to us. All right.